"Son, I have to tell you something," Agnes said to Ethan. "Mom, I love to hear the details, but I need to go and meet Irene right now," Ethan said, getting up to leave. "It's been ages. I miss her." "That's exactly what I need to talk to you about," Agnes said. Ethan's expressions suddenly changed. The smile of excitement he had a few seconds ago wholly vanished. "What do you mean? Did something happen to her?" "Please sit down," Agnes insisted, knowing her son needed to be seated for this news. Ethan didn't argue and did as he was told. "What happened, Ma? Please say something," Ethan urged. He saw the concern on his mother's face and knew something was wrong. "Irene left you for another man," she exclaimed after trying so hard to say it more nicely but failed. "What do you mean?" Ethan's mind could not comprehend what his mother had said. He had already suffered too much for his age. He wasn't ready for a blow like this. "Sweetie, she is dating Mr. Smith's son, the heir to the oil company. She even sent her engagement ring back. I put it up in your room," Agnes explained, trying to hold back her tears after seeing her son's reaction. She knew very well how much he loved her. This news was bound to break his heart, so she waited for him to return so that she could tell it to him in person. Ethan, who was in the military, had been serving in Afghanistan and had just returned after a year. While there, the thought of only two people kept him going through the difficult time: his mother, Agnes, and his beautiful fiancée, Irene. Coming from a low-income family where his mother was a widow from a very young age, Ethan decided to join the army and help his mother financially. He wanted to earn something so that he could return, marry the love of his life, and settle down, taking care of his mother. To his despair, things did not go as he had planned. He couldn't believe it. He had never been wrong about anyone. How could he not see that Irene wasn't loyal? He remembered seeing nothing but love in her eyes. This news shocked the young man so much that it began to affect his mental health. He would have sudden outbursts of anger, punch walls, and argue with random people. As a result, he was barred from returning to the military. He had lost everything except his mother, of course. Agnes had worked hard all her life, working 2 shifts to make ends meet. She wanted the best for her son and finally felt content when he got a stable job in the army. But that happiness did not last. Instead, at such an old age, she was compelled to begin working again. She started working at a local factory, stitching clothes all day long. Sitting in that position caused her severe back pain, which did not go unnoticed by her son. Ethan decided that it was time to pull himself together. He couldn't keep punishing the only good person he had in life for his own mistakes and wrong choices. "Mom, I'm sorry for everything I have put you through, but I promise this is the end of your misery," he said one day. He had his head in her lap as she combed her fingers through his hair. "What do you mean, honey? The military isn't an option now," she stated. "I know. I found another job. It doesn't pay that well, but it will be enough to pay your medical bills and get you to quit your job." He looked up at her and smiled. She only had one son, no other child or husband, but she knew this one son would be enough for her. A tear rolled down her cheek, which she wiped right away. "Where did you get the job?" she asked. "At Luck Oil as a truck driver," he said, knowing how his mother would react. "Wait, what? That oil company? The same one owned by Mr. Smith?" she asked, her voice getting louder with every word. Ethan nodded. "The same Mr. Smith whose son that bitch Irene ran off with?" "Ma, please don't say that about her." "What do you mean? First, she leaves you for another man. Then she is the reason you lose your job in the military. And now she will have you work under her new boyfriend." Agnes was yelling now. Just the idea of her son working for that man filled her with rage. "I can keep working until you find a better job." It took that entire evening for Ethan to convince his mother finally, but fortunately, he was able to do so. Living in a small town, finding a job was not easy, especially if you had a record of anger management issues. The following week, Ethan began his job at Luck Oil as a truck driver. He would spend days out on the road transporting their oil, getting only a few hours of sleep every day. Every time he felt exhausted, he would close his eyes and remember his mother, which was more than enough to get him going again. Although Ethan was gradually getting used to the work schedule, there was something about the behavior of Mr. Smith that didn't feel right. Any chance that the man would get to humiliate Ethan, he wouldn't miss it. It was as if he was looking for excuses to shout at him, not just at his own small mistakes, but even when some other driver did something wrong, Ethan would be blamed. At first, it felt as if it was just a coincidence, but eventually it became apparent that it was entirely intentional. Of course, Ethan didn't share this with his mother. She would have become defensive and forced him to quit. That was not an option for him. He needed this job. He needed to take care of his mother, and now he had no other opportunity. The discrimination continued, and daily it became harder for him to control his anger in that situation. It was as if they were trying their best to incite him, just so that he would have an outburst of rage. Ethan was smart enough not to fall for it until one day they crossed all boundaries. During the company audit, it came to light that somebody was stealing oil from the trucks. As expected, Mr. Smith came to Ethan and started accusing him of the theft. He could take anything, any accusation, but Ethan was not a thief. This is the one accusation he couldn't stand. He could feel his heartbeat racing with anger as his legs began shaking. "Listen, sir, everybody here knows what you've been doing with me this past month, but if there's one thing I'm not putting up with, it's being called a thief," Ethan said sternly. "So are you calling me a liar, saying that I've been targeting you unfairly?" Mr. Smith retorted. "I'm just saying I'm not the person who stole the oil. Find the real person who did," Ethan said, turning around to leave since he had had enough. "What else can you expect from the son of a whore who'd sleep with any man just to get a loaf of bread?" Mr. Smith snickered. It was as if all the anger Ethan had been storing for the past month was ready to flow out. How could someone say this about the woman who had done everything for him on her own? His jaws tightened, his fists clenched. It was as if he no longer had any control over his body. He was a different person now, a person who would do anything to protect his mother. He turned around, running towards his boss and knocking him onto the floor. He sat on his chest and began to punch him in the face. It took a while for the other drivers around him to understand what had just happened. They ran towards them, pulling Ethan off of Mr. Smith. Ethan couldn't help but notice Mr. Smith's expression when he was being dragged away. Despite being beaten up and having a bleeding nose, the older man was smiling. It was a smile of success, as if this was what he had wanted all along. That evening, Ethan returned home, and even before he could tell his mother about what had happened that day, the police came storming in and took him away. Agnes was left crying, wondering what her son had done to cause this. Only a day later, a friend from work came to visit her and told her about what had happened. Ethan was charged with assault and theft. Since the Smiths were wealthy and influential, they hired the best lawyers to fight this case against him. It didn't come as a surprise when Ethan was convicted of both crimes, beginning his time in prison. Prison life wasn't as tough as Ethan had expected it to be. There were only two things that bothered him there. The first was that he had become a victim of the plans the Smith had against him. Was it Irene who made them do this? He would often think to himself, why would she? He didn't even go after her, letting her live the life she wanted to. The second thing that bothered him even more was that his mother was all alone at this age, even though she did not deserve any of it. Days turned into months, and the same thoughts plagued Ethan's mind. One day, Eric, like the prison leader, came up to talk to him. Everybody in prison was afraid of Eric. That is the level of influence he had inside and outside the prison. He came from a wealthy family and was inside on some charges of drug abuse. When Eric came close to Ethan, the latter was worried if he had done something to upset him. But in reality, Eric would prove to be his savior. As it turned out, years ago, before Ethan had even joined the army, he had helped save the lives of Eric and his entire family. Their car had gotten into an accident, leading to a fire. Everybody around them moved away, scared that the car would explode. The firefighters were still a few minutes away, and the entire family could lose their life at that time. It was at that moment that Ethan decided to step up. He rushed towards the car and pulled each family member out, one by one, bringing them to safety. He had no idea then that this act of courage would come back and reward him like this someday. He wanted to help Ethan out, so he used his influence to hire a private detective and the best lawyers to find the truth and free Ethan of his guilty charge. Soon, Ethan got to know the entire truth, which completely blew his mind away. This whole time, Irene hadn't left him. She had been abducted by Mr. Smith's spoiled son and was kept in that house against her will. They got the police to conduct a raid, finding her in that house. The Smiths were convicted of several crimes while Ethan was free on parole. After more than a year, he met Irene, who was still madly in love with him. He knew he couldn't be wrong about her. The two of them eventually married and began their life together, giving Agnes the life of ease she always deserved.
It was an early Monday morning, and it's going to be a long day at work because last Friday, I called in sick because I was recovering from the hangover I had on Thursday night, after my friends forced me to a club to celebrate one of ours, who just got promoted at work. I had so much to drink, even though I was supposed to take just a little, because my tolerance for alcohol was low. Hence, the hangover was inevitable. I lost myself while dancing, and as far as I remember, I danced like no one was watching, even though I could be timid on a typical day. I'm an ambivert, so blending into the social part of me wasn't so tricky anyways. Besides, I was drunk, and you know what alcohol does. It brings out the crazy amount of you with some confidence. Some guys shot their shots at the club, but I never gave them attention, as I assumed them to be time wasters, especially white guys. I had learned the hard way from my ordeal with my ex-boyfriend, who was a redneck. He'd generally given me a wrong impression about white guys. A story for another day. While I turned all of these guys down, a particular black dude got me hands down. I didn't know what he did to me, but I must confess, it got me real good. I didn't hesitate when he offered to buy me a drink, and even invited me to dance with him, even though I had turned down tons of guys that had come earlier. The last thing I remember at the club was dancing with him, and the next thing was finding myself in my bed after a call from my office woke me on Friday morning. I had even missed previous calls while sleeping. I probably might have dozed off after dancing with the guy when my friends brought me home. I'm a young black woman in her late 20s with a good-paying job. I often get the "you are so lucky" line, but I waved it off as I don't regard it as a compliment, as I don't believe in luck, but rather hard work. My hard work has got me to where I am today because I work extraordinarily to earn extravagantly. I'm a beautiful damsel because the mirror doesn't lie. My friends often compliment me while I giggle and blush softly, trying not to make it obvious, you know, the big girl thing. On a more serious note, I need no one's approval to accept that I'm beautiful. My philosophy about beauty is that every human, black or white, is gorgeous, as we are all fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm ready for today and all the stress that comes with it since I skipped Friday, and Monday is a naturally busy day. Deep down I pitied myself, but shrugged my shoulders after remembering I am blessed with the best colleague at work. My colleague is named Mark. He's a sweet guy. He helps out with everything. He always makes work easy for me, justifying his kind gestures with a particular statement: "You're an angel, and you deserve zero stress. I'll help you out." I can't help but blush whenever he utters this line, as the line never gets old. A noticeable blush this time as the big girl in me vanishes, and I often react with a smile and a soft tone. Thank you. As I got to work, I noticed Mark wasn't in his seat, and that was so unlike him, as he gets to work before anyone does. So I asked the secretary why Mark wasn't in the office yet. Then she gave me the shocker of my life. Did you guess what she said? Possibly you thought right. The secretary informed me that Mark has been sick and won't be coming today, as he was even absent on Friday, as was I. This isn't good, I muttered. I said further that a good guy like Mark doesn't deserve to fall sick. Just then it crossed my mind why he didn't call me on Friday morning, as I didn't show up early, because he gives me the first call each time I stay late, before the secretary calls. But he didn't even call throughout the weekend. It was unusual, and I should have sensed that before now. I felt terrible. I didn't call the poor guy, but I was going to make it up to him by stopping by his apartment after work to check on him and drop off some provisions. I knew I was in deep shit at that moment. I received the information about Mark from the secretary. I'd have to cover for all of the work myself, and at least cover some of Mark's, because he would do the same if I were in his shoes. I've got some brief board meetings to attend and some proposals to submit to the boss. I immediately started the work. I still had some other tasks. I will reach the nearby mall to get stuff done after work hours, drop by Mark's apartment, prepare dinner when I get home, and then prepare for the next day. As a senior staff member, I close at 4 p.m., but I have stayed till 5 p.m. already, and I need to start packing up to attend other things I scheduled for the day before night comes. I will cover the rest tomorrow since I listened to the urgent and important ones already, I said to myself as I dashed out of the office. I divided my tasks as I set a proposed timetable to make them attainable and more accessible for me. I drove to the mall down the road and finished shopping even before the time I had set. At least I'd have more time to myself. The next was to visit Mark. I immediately started my car engine. It gave a weird sound, but I didn't even mind. I zoomed off. Did I mention Mark's house was far from the office? How he managed to get to work before any of us every day is what amazes me. He's a workaholic. I was on a highway and I was driving so fast. If you saw my pace, two things would likely cross your mind. I had just joined Dominic Toronto and his colleagues for another fast and furious race, or I was driving for Professor in another money heist mission. The experience, however, didn't end well. Just while I was enjoying my whole fast and furious ride, one of my car tires blew out of its spot while the car was still in motion. I was scared that it didn't even know when I matched the brake. My steering had stiffed, and the car's screeching sound as it reached to the brake got me scarier, but thankfully it stopped. I believe God loves me because I might have lost my life to that accident, but I came out without a scratch. I get out from the car as I was trying to imagine what would have happened if the vehicle had refused to stop. I was grateful to God. I immediately ran to grab my phone in the car to call my mechanic, but it was off already. I left my charger home and didn't even have a car charger. It became apparent that I was stranded as I didn't know what to do next. It was a deserted highway with just a few passing cars. I tried waving down for some vehicles in motion to signal for aid, but none waited. I got tired and frustrated, as no one was ready to help, possibly because it was a dry area and it was getting cloudy already. But all I needed is a damn phone to call an Uber, I grumbled. I was worn out and felt like crying, as little things drove me teary. How do I manage the timetable I had set? I said to myself as I kicked the car in anger. It was painful, but I didn't mind. After a few minutes, a Ford 150 drove past me, but pulled over after a few seconds, just around where my car stopped. I saw a redneck guy come down from the vehicle, approaching the direction where my car stopped. I looked away as I didn't expect anything good to come from a redneck guy, and had promised not to have anything to do with rednecks. I needed his help, but my ego was more important than whatever favor I thought within myself. The next thing I heard was a baritone voice asking if there was a problem. I immediately answered him, claiming everything was fine, but he insisted that a young lady wouldn't just decide to stay on the highway if everything was fine. I yelled at him to let me be, but he insisted he only came to help. For a second, I thought it would be nice to trash the ego as I needed help. He was about to take his leave, since I wasn't ready to give him an audience like the gentle guy I suppose he was. Swiftly, I asked him to wait as I moved towards him reluctantly. I explained how my tire suddenly blew out, and it's awful as I have a lot to do within a short period, and I'm running out of time already. He didn't utter a word as he moved around my vehicle, checking if any other part of my vehicle had developed a fault. Still, I guess it was just the tire, as I had to take it to the workshop for a monthly mechanical checkup, and my mechanic would have hinted to me if he had detected anything. Not long after, he made a call to someone, and all I could hear was, "Yeah, I'll text you the address right away. Thank you," and he dropped the call. That must have been his mechanic. I was lost while standing because I would have doubted if anyone had told me earlier that a redneck would be saving my ass this evening. He was typing on his phone while I tried to process the unbelievable. I supposed he was texting the mechanic. When he finished, he asked where I was going. I told him I was headed to a colleague's place before my car tire blew out. He offered to drive me down, but I rejected him. As I shouldn't stress further, he insisted, so I hopped in his car. While in the car, he asked if I had the means to get home once I left my colleagues, or if I'd be staying over at his place. I told him I was only going to check on him as he was sick, and as well deliver the stuff I had got him. I won't be staying long as it's already getting late, and I have to prepare for work tomorrow. I told him I was only going to check on him as he was sick, and as well deliver the stuff I got him, and I won't be staying long as it's getting late already and I have to prepare for work tomorrow, but told him I'd sort myself and thanked him. Then he said if that's the case, he will wait to take me home since he's free. Trust me, I insisted it won't be necessary, but he was obstinate. It didn't seem like he was ready to succumb, so I gave in instead. We got to Mark's apartment and I met him in the living room. I sharply asked that he forgives me for not calling or checking on him during the time as I didn't know he was sick. I told him about what I encountered on my way to his place and explained how God had sent one redneck guy to my aid. I told him he was outside and needed to start going, so I didn't delay the new guy further. Mark thanked me for the stuff I got him and assured me he would resume the following day. I dashed out and made my way to where the guy parked. He drove to a restaurant and got me a takeaway meal while I stayed in the car. He said I must be famished and exhausted to cook when I get home. He later drove to my house as I directed him at every junction. He possibly hadn't been to my area before. He looked too expensive for my hood, even though my hood isn't rotten anyways. He dropped me at my entrance. I was surprised, although the moment we were in the car, he didn't even ask for my name or phone number, at least as compensation for the favor he rendered. I thanked him profusely, as I was amused at such a kind gesture. I asked if he would come in for a drink, but he refused as he said he had to catch up with friends at the bar because it was around 8 p.m. already. When he was about to go, he told me my car was safe as it had been towed to his mechanic's workshop, who gave him the update when I was still with Mark. I was ecstatic. I was about to ask how to locate the mechanic, but he cut in before I could ask for the time I resumed work daily. I didn't hesitate to reply, at 8 a.m. Although I didn't know why he asked, then he informed me he had already sorted my car expenses, which would be delivered to my compound before I leave for my office tomorrow, as he would text the mechanic my home address, and he zoomed off. I stood as I watched his car disappear into thin air. I didn't doubt his kindness for a second, as it was just too accurate and undiluted. I was assured he would keep to his promise, so I slept like a baby with no worries. I was not wrong. The redneck guy kept his word. The mechanic's honk on my gate woke me the following day, as he delivered my car with a new set of tires. Just one tire blew out, but I guess the redneck must have paid for 4 replacements. I was astonished, more dumbfounded, but I tried to package up so the mechanic didn't see the expression on my face. When I asked the mechanic for his number, he told me he had already given him a stern warning not to release it, as he thought I might want to thank him. However, he sent a short note in a paper which reads thus: "I pulled over yesterday because you're a beautiful black woman who doesn't deserve to be in distress. And it was an honor I was able to help in my little way." That day, the redneck guy changed my perceptions about white guys. He taught me most nicely and quickly that not all rednecks are racists. On that note, I understood the fact that kindness is more about personality and less about color.
There is a famous saying that says respect is reciprocal. How you treat others is how you will be treated in the long run. Jacob is a famous website designer who has done many excellent jobs for people. He was always profound at work. He hardly has time for himself or his wife. A successful man cannot fully achieve greatness without the help of a determined woman, they say. Jacob married a beautiful woman who had a long fit into his lifestyle. She loves him wholeheartedly. However, they both lack communication, which the wife has always complained about. Whenever she brought up the topic, Jacob's usual excuse for not keeping up was his job. The wife continued to bear this for her love for him. They had no children yet, as he was always too busy for her. Jacob has a couple of friends they grew up together, and their relationship, though far away but to a reasonable extent, was excellent. During a rare discussion with his friends, they decided it would be nice for them to meet up like old times and catch up with old-time stuff. Every one of them was so successful in their respective business lines, but it seemed only Jacob's family had been so unpleasant, as they were the only ones without kids. He reluctantly accepted the get-together. The amazing thing was that it would take place in his house. He didn't see it as a big deal, so he never spoke to his wife about it or tried to ask for her opinion. She was not going to say no anyway, and it's my house, was his conclusion. His pride and ego were the significant problems the wife had to deal with since they were married. She learned about the get-together through her friend Helen, who happened to be the wife of Jacob's best friend, Mason. She was at first furious about the discovery that she wanted to confront Jacob out of anger, but as usual, she had consoled herself with the reason that Jacob might want to surprise her. She blushed over it and smiled at the lie she had just told herself. He finally told her casually on the day of the visitation, then headed out for the preparation without any further information about what the party should look like. A few hours was all that they needed for the preparation, as the sitting room had been converted to a party ground. Everyone loved the room's design and how she transformed the sitting room in no time. They all commended her creativity. She got nice compliments from the four families. She must have anticipated her husband's response, but to her greatest disappointment, he never said a word about it. The party started, and the families seemed to have a lot of fun as the men laughed and shared childhood memories. The atmosphere was filled with nostalgic moments. While the men talked and teased about their childhood, the ladies were about fashion and the latest trends in town. It was a beautiful moment filled with a lot of positivity and vibes. Not long after, the alcohol they took began to have the best of them. It was already affecting all of them. They decided to sit down and talk about how their lives had been. They decided to talk about each person's challenges and how best to help one another. Their union had a good purpose, and all of them kept talking about how wonderful their marriages had been and how they had been getting along all this while. Jacob's wife was jealous of them because she lacked most of the things they enjoyed in their marriages. When it was time for Jacob to talk, he ran his mouth and said many things about his wife. He belittled his wife and even concluded all she was good at was eating. He said she had been lazy, and he was the only one working, and seemed to spend his money on unnecessary materials. All the guests in the room were so shocked and disappointed. Jacob didn't see a problem in what he did. He didn't understand how embarrassing that moment was for his wife. He kept nagging, and each time the wife tried to defend herself, he shut her up. His friends could not take it anymore, believing he needed to apologize instantly. He bluntly disagreed with them as his ego got the best of him. Mason's wife was the first to get off the party as she instructed her husband to follow her immediately. The other guys stood up with their families angrily and left. Mason, who was also on his feet, told Jacob he would regret being disrespectful to his wife soon. He apologized to Jacob's wife on behalf of Jacob and left with disappointment. Jacob was left with his wife. He still failed to acknowledge the fact that he embarrassed her. The wife could not hold back her tears as she ran into her room. Jacob, who didn't see anything wrong with what he said, kept sipping his alcohol and watching his favorite news channel. After all, he had the right to express himself. The wife wept profusely as she remembered everything she had put in place for the success of the get-together and how everything eventually ended, least expectedly. Many thoughts came flowing into her head, and she realized it was time for her to act. She was not going to take it anymore. She wiped her tears and got back angrily to confront Jacob. She had never confronted or challenged Jacob's authority before that moment. Jacob was astonished about his wife's uproar. Jacob slapped her twice and shut her up. The situation became very intense. Jacob's wife was a school teacher before she married Jacob. She wouldn't have agreed to marry him if she had noticed something like this when they were courting. She had her life back then. She had to quit her job after they married, as Jacob had instructed her to do. She still found it challenging to understand what she had done to deserve the ill treatment from her husband. How could he insult her like that in front of his friends? She busted into another round of tears, and even out of frustration, she just wanted to disappear from everyone. Jacob entered the room some minutes later. He jumped onto the bed and told her good night with no apologies whatsoever. She felt like killing him and then running away. She has never felt this way. All she has always done was love him and always do her best to bring out his best. Something rare to believe was the love she had for him. It was more robust than the ocean wave, but he kept hurting her pride and always saw her as nothing. She had always considered her husband's choice in every decision. She concluded all of those things have to stop regardless of what the outcome might be. The worst was going to be divorce. At least it was better than staying in this bondage called marriage. Her love set in again as she wished he could change. She concluded she would look for a new job the following day. She had to keep herself busy. She got a call from Mason early the following day. Mason knew Jacob better than anyone and was sure his pride would not let him apologize. He had always been like that, even at work, but he remained a vital part of the company's plan because he was among the few best in his department. After the call, she dressed up and left home. That was new, so it surprised Jacob, as she didn't clean the house or even make his breakfast. She never joked with Jacob's breakfast. Jacob entered the kitchen and prepared his breakfast himself. When he got to the kitchen, it looked untidy, all thanks to the get-together that didn't end well because he was telling the truth about his wife. He smiled when he remembered how Mason's wife reacted to the situation. He fumbled with the breakfast and even stained his clothes. That was his best, he growled. It wasn't difficult to secure another teaching job because of her past experiences and her intelligence in teaching. She soon found a job in mid-school and was to start work the following day. She stayed in a coffee shop down the street to reflect and strategize about her new job. Jacob did not seem to be himself at work. He managed to fit into everything, but it seemed nothing was clicking or connecting. He needed to talk to his wife, who had always been his companion. She always had the best advice for him whenever he was in an awkward situation. His time at work was eventually over, and he still felt uneasy. When he got home, everything remained as it was. He turned his face in anger. He didn't care if she was still angry. She has to give him a reason for not cleaning the house. She only had one job after all. He realized she was not even back yet from wherever she had gone. He became worried despite his act and pride. He loved his wife, even though his actions often countered that. He picked up his phone to call her, but she refused. She kept ignoring the call. She later decided to sleep in a hotel and plan what her new life would look like. No matter how much love, the moment the relationship started getting out of hand, it is better to walk away. Jacob could not meet up with how untidy the house was. He decided to clean up while waiting for his wife to return, with a genuine excuse for abandoning her daily duty. Cleaning the house was one of the most stressful jobs ever. He washed the dishes and cleaned up. By the time he was done, the time was far gone. It was beginning to dawn on him that his wife was not coming back home that night. She was not even a night crawler. He began to have different thoughts in his head. He began to ask several rhetorical questions and kept soliloquizing as he picked up his phone to call his best friend, Mason. He explained the situation of things to him. Mason just replied, "Okay," and ended the call on Jacob. Jacob figured out he was still angry due to the previous day's outburst. He decided to go to bed. The night wasn't fair to him. His tummy would not let him rest. He was an ulcer patient. He needed to eat at least a bit before taking his medication. If she were available, she would ensure he was fine. She cared that much. Jacob survived the night. The following morning, he drove as fast as possible to the hospital to get treated. After 2 weeks, Jacob's wife was still nowhere to be found. He had looked around for her, and none of his friends were ready to help him. He lost focus at work and asked to take a break. His life became miserable in the space of weeks. Indeed, when you lose a good woman, you regret your actions. Jacob realized his mistakes and knew he had lost a jewel. He wished for another opportunity to apologize. When he was narrating how miserable his life had been in the short space of his wife's absence, he didn't know when he started crying. He could not even think of finding another woman. She was the best for him. Mason has been communicating with Jacob's wife since she left home, knowing her whereabouts. He had been paying for her hotel bills. He waited so long for the day Jacob returned to his senses. His friend's secret confession moved him. He told the wife about it and thought it was time for her to return home as Jacob learned his lessons. She initially insisted, but after constant pleas from Mason, she reluctantly accepted going back home. Mason and his wife have been good to her ever since that night. It was Mason's idea for her to leave the house in order to teach Jacob a lesson. When she knocked at the door, she was surprised to see Jacob had grown so unkempt. It was only 3 weeks, but he looked so wasted. He seemed to be doing more drinking than eating and sleeping. She blamed herself for leaving him like that, but she figured out the space was needed so he could learn his lesson. Jacob could not hide his surprise. He jumped at her like a baby and kissed her. She was so excited by his move. He instantly went down on his knees to apologize. He even made a vow never to do something like that again, as he realized how important and how impactful she had been to his life. She hinted about her new job, and Jacob was excellent with that. She continued her work, and they both agreed it was high time they had kids. She taught him something great. You can't treat someone like a pinch of salt and expect to be carried like a bag of rice. Indeed, respect is reciprocal, no matter a man's status or position. He has no reason to disrespect or belittle a woman, especially his wife. Jacob was lucky his wife decided to give him a second chance. Not everyone will be as fortunate as Jacob. This is why you must start treating your woman with respect, beginning from this moment.
Many years have passed since Dick's father left him with his mother, but this trauma remained forever in his soul. Now, he remembered his mother's tears, her confusion, misunderstanding, and wondering how to move on. As for him, he was experiencing such a difficult feeling of disconnection from reality because of what had happened. He couldn't believe that Dad could do this just because he liked some other woman. Dick had replayed this episode in his head many times in adulthood, but he did not change his opinion. He will be a good father to his children, and they will not have to go through what he went through. And a good husband for the one he chooses to marry. When he first saw Melanie, he immediately thought that she was the one. But until the moment of their wedding, several more years passed. And now, remembering all the years they had lived together, he thought that fulfilling the promise made to himself was not difficult at all. After all, he loved his family very much. This year, he will definitely try not to forget about their wedding anniversary. Melanie was finishing her makeup in front of her favorite dressing table with quick movements. There were only finishing touches left, but she was already a little late for work. She wasn't particularly worried. Anyway, the boss was always late. If you came in 10 to 15 minutes late, no one would notice. The apartment was unusually quiet, all because Dick had already taken the children to kindergarten. He was only in the office for lunch today. Early in the morning, Melanie noticed that for some reason, Dick had grabbed a bunch of keys for their country house from the closet. She accidentally saw him hurriedly put them in his pocket. "Why do you need those keys to our country house?" she asked. Dick hesitated. I'll drop in there before work," Dick finally said. "I left some tools there, and a colleague asked me to borrow them. Can you fill up the pool at the same time? We will go there this weekend, and the water will have already warmed up," Melanie suggested and hurried to the kitchen. The children had to be woken up already. She wanted to have time to drink a cup of coffee in peace and quiet. "No, I can't fill up the pool. I'm literally going to run there for 10 minutes, tools and back," Dick said. "Well, we'll fill it up together this weekend," Melanie sighed. The morning went on as usual, and the children, as usual, did not want to wake up and go to the garden. Melanie gave the role of negotiator to Dick. Dick was always better than she was at influencing their daughters. Father of the Year, coped with a difficult task. And now, for a few minutes later, the bathed girls were already sitting in the living room waiting for the traditional morning toasts with sweet tea. And how does he do it? Melanie wondered once again. She herself could not boast of such patience and diplomatic talent. And her sense of humor, which Dick actively used in communicating with children, refused her in the morning. Melanie completed her makeup by covering her lips with cherry gloss, admired the result a little in the mirror, and winked at herself. Yes, after all, he was lucky to have her as his wife, and he himself often said so. Never skimped on compliments and gifts. In all the 10 years of family life, Melanie thanked fate for Dick more than once. She felt good with him, calm and fun. But other colleagues often complained about their spouses, and Melanie even felt uncomfortable because she could not support such a conversation. After all, both Dick and her were satisfied with absolutely everything. It had been 10 years since the wedding, and he had proved many times in practice that Melanie made the right choice by becoming his wife. He was wonderful to her when they dated. She was a pretty girl, and at the time she had a lot of male suitors. But she did not experience the pleasant feeling of kinship of souls and confidence with the others as she did with Dick. Of course, Dick had minor flaws, but Melanie even liked it. Otherwise, she would feel too imperfect against the background of an ideal husband. For example, Dick was bad at remembering dates, even about the upcoming birthdays of his relatives, Melanie reminded him. So today, Dick forgot about the important holiday of the decade of their anniversary, but Melanie was not offended because she knew the peculiarity of her husband and perfectly saw how important their family was to him. Melanie was expecting a call sometime around lunchtime when Dick finally called. She was looking forward to how he would blame himself for forgetfulness in a guilty voice and, of course, arrange some surprise in the evening. In the office, she was immediately wrapped up in business. It turned out that a check from Washington is expected the other day. Melanie was overwhelmed with work, so she skipped lunch. It was only in the late afternoon that she finally sorted out her urgent tasks and poured herself a cup of coffee. At that moment, her phone beeped. Melanie accepted the call without even looking at the screen, and she was sure it was Dick. I remembered their anniversary and called with congratulations. To hear a familiar and encouraging voice was just what was needed now. But a neighbor at the country house called, who lived next to them with her husband and children. They had daughters about the same age, and this brought the neighbors closer together, turning them into good friends. Families often arranged joint trips to the countryside, fishing, kebabs, and gatherings around the campfire. Such events were always fun and noisy. Melanie's friend Jenny started the conversation. "Hi, how are you doing? You sound really tired." "Hi, I'm just starting to have lunch at work," Melanie replied. "Wow, it's almost 5 o'clock. "Well, yes, it happens sometimes," Melanie said. "And how do you keep up with everything?" Jenny asked. She did not work, and she was busy with the house and children. "I don't understand it myself," Melanie admitted. "I don't even know how to ask," Jenny hesitated, clearly not daring to start a conversation on some awkward topic. "Do you need to borrow money? Don't be shy. Tell me how much you need, and I'll help you out," Melanie said. No, that's not the point. Just here, just wanted to ask. I wanted to ask, Jenny said. Melanie began to get annoyed and said, I don't have time to talk for a long time. I need to have a snack faster and get back to work. All right, Jenny decided. Don't you live with Dick anymore? What? Melanie almost fell out of her chair from the unexpected question. What makes you think that? Well, he arrived in the morning, Jenny spoke excitedly. Yes, not alone, with some woman and 2 children, and with a bunch of things. They were unloaded from the car for a long time, as if it's like moving. I don't understand, Melanie whispered. What things? What woman? Beautiful, Jenny said. Full face of makeup, curvy, and smiling all the time. And your husband was talking to her incessantly, and also joyful. It looks like they're moving in together. I think they're going to live here. I thought he'd found another woman for himself, and even with children. I decided that you kicked him out of the apartment, so he came here with them all. Jenny, I don't understand anything at all. So you weren't even aware of it? Jenny was surprised. Well, who would have thought? It's not like your husband at all. Let me send you a picture of them now, and you'll see for yourself. Melanie leaned back wearily in her chair. The conversation with Jenny seemed to knock her feet off the ground. Dick seemed to her the most reliable person in the world, and she was confident in him already more than in herself. And now this call. And ironically, on their anniversary. Maybe he brought his sister. Melanie seized on the saving thought. She just has 2 children, and with her husband, always quarreling, suddenly left him. Dick invited them to the country house to stay. He just didn't have time to warn her. Then the phone beeped again. The promised photo from Jenny arrived. Dick was in the picture, and a completely unknown woman was next to him. Indeed, a very spectacular lady was in the photo. He took out huge suitcases from the trunk, looked at the beauty with happy eyes, smiled. She, too, was clearly in high spirits. Tears came to Melanie's eyes, because she felt his full betrayal. If Dick decided to live with this woman, then everything has been going on for a long time. But as a wife, she didn't notice anything before. After all, there must have been some signs. Really, she is so naive. How can you not notice that her husband has a serious relationship on the side? In fact, the second family since they decided to live together. Melanie did not know what to do. At first, she wanted to call her husband and tell him that she knew everything, and then she decided to act more effectively. It was decided that she would go to the country house in person and make her unfaithful spouse and this destroyer of families feel guilty and humiliated. It was not easy to ask the boss for time off, but in the end, of course, he agreed. Okay, go solve your family problems. You look like you've seen a ghost. You don't have any work today anyway. On the way to the country house, Melanie called her mother and asked her to pick up the girls from kindergarten. She most likely won't have time until 7 p.m. today, and the scene promised to be ugly and loud. After all, she was unlikely to be able to go for the children. Dick has already asked me to pick them up. Of course I will go for my granddaughters with pleasure, Melanie heard her say in response. That's how strange it is, she thought. Did Dick foresee this situation and take care in advance that the children were taken out of the garden during the time? Of course, he turned out to be a pathetic husband, but he still remained a caring father. Melanie drove without being careful on the road and almost got into an accident a couple of times because her thoughts were spinning in her head. Her world, which seemed happy, strong, and unshakable, was collapsing. How could he? What to do now, and why didn't she notice anything? Questions crowded into her head and did not allow her to concentrate on the road. Burning tears were coming to her eyes, and now she would join the ranks of grumpy, abandoned women dissatisfied with life and men. Melanie used to think that we were to blame for our failures. They could not build a harmonious relationship with their spouses or somehow behaved incorrectly, and now she was one of them. At the beginning of the summer, Melanie and Dick allowed their daughters to decorate the high fence around the country house to their taste. They enthusiastically got down to business, and now the fence was covered with butterflies, painted with acrylic paints on both sides, flowers and princesses. Seeing the creation of the children, Dick jokingly grabbed his head, and it seemed to her how cute everything was, and the pink beauty was unreal. Melanie, let's give our daughters a brother. Otherwise, we clearly lack in design, cars, and robots, Dick had joked. "Brother, brother," the girls chanted then, clapping their hands. They obviously liked their father's idea, and Melanie didn't mind at all, and it wasn't scary with a husband like Dick, or that's what she thought. It's a good thing they didn't rush from plans to action. Otherwise, it would have been even harder now. This idyllic scene unfolded just a month and a half ago. Surely Dick was already secretly dating another woman. He had a relationship on the side and started talking about a third child? How could it have been 10 years to live with such a hypocrite next to her, and also consider him an ideal husband at the same time? Either she was completely stupid or her husband was a brilliant actor, one or the other. Melanie stopped at the neighbor's gate, got out of the car, with her heart pounding loudly, and approached her country house. Now she will have to ring her own doorbell as an outsider, and what if this woman opens it? Then what to do? But she didn't have to press the bell button. The door opened by itself. Dick hurried out into the street in shorts, a faded t-shirt, and old flip-flops. He had a package in his hands, apparently heading to a local store. When he saw Melanie, he was stunned and said, "What are you doing here?" With a confused smile, the man approached his wife and looked at her attentively and anxiously. "Did something happen? Why do you look like that?" He spoke softly. "Is everything okay with the kids?" I'm just going to see Jenny." Melanie lied badly. She could not begin the difficult conversation. She had thought out a heartfelt speech while she was driving, but now she saw Dick, and for some reason all the words flew out of her head. Dick was surprised and acted strangely. "You said you'd only take the tools for a colleague," Melanie reminded. "It's already evening and you're still here." "Yes, my plan has failed," Dick said thoughtfully. "I was waiting for you a little later." "What? Waiting?" "Yes, everything should have happened a little differently, but you know what? Well, it's okay. Wait a bit in the car, or at Jenny's, and I'll be right there." With these words, Dick disappeared through the door, not forgetting to turn the lock. Stunned, Melanie leaned against the fence. She did not expect such impudence, even in the current situation. Of course, her husband greatly disappointed her and made it clear that she was mistaken in him. But to slam the door in her face? To make her wait for something on the street? By the way, what was he doing? Morally preparing his new lover for a meeting with an angry wife? Melanie moved resolutely to the door. This was too much. Now she will face them both. She will bang on the gate until she gets inside, if necessary. She will climb over the high fence or call the police. Anger gave her strength and confidence. Just not to lose confidence again. Melanie had almost reached the door when it opened by itself. Dick was standing on the threshold, smiling. In a moment, he managed to pull himself together. The husband looked at her with a smile and held out his hand to her, inviting her into the garden. Melanie, who did not understand anything, looked around in surprise. The place was transformed beyond recognition. Garlands were hung everywhere. Tall figures depicting fairy tale characters could be seen here and there, and right under the spreading apple tree there was a table set for two. As soon as Melanie entered, beautiful music rang out. She turned around and saw 3 violinists in concert costumes next to the pool. And it seemed so amazing and unreal that Melanie was simply speechless. Dick was beside her, leading her by the hand to the table. The same woman came out on the porch of the house. She was the woman from the photo Jenny had sent her. She was wearing a long dress to the floor, and in her hands she was holding a microphone. "What's this?" Melanie managed to squeeze out. "This is my surprise for you, for us. I purposely pretended in the morning that I forgot about the anniversary as usual so that you wouldn't suspect anything. Everything should have gone differently. A white limousine would have come to work for you and brought you here, and on the way you would have changed into a dress like a princess. I chose it myself. I think you'll like it. I wanted to make this day fabulous and unforgettable for us." "You did this for me?" Melanie hugged her husband and tried to hold back tears. This time she wanted to cry from relief and happiness. And then there was a wonderful show in honor of the wedding anniversary. It was done by the woman from the photo. Live music, a magician, a guest singer. And then the children that Jenny saw performed an acrobatic performance. Melanie had changed her mind so much in the few hours since Jenny's call, but she certainly hadn't expected this. Later, when it got dark, there were bright fireworks. Melanie looked at the multicolored flowers blooming in the black sky, and she was happy again. Dick gave her a fairy tale. It's a good thing she didn't have time to ruin everything.
In the group, no one but Emma's girlfriend spoke to her. You can say they used her for their purposes. None of her classmates respected her. His name was Jason. He was a bully. The girl rejected his attempts to talk to her, because a rich guy would never love such a gray mouse. And it was true. He had an adult interest in her. Fearing it, she constantly avoided contact. But it was hard because they were in the same class. He had no other choice but to track down Barbara's apartment. He started guarding her at the entrance. "I thought I'd drop you off at school." The girl was upset when she saw her classmates in the yard of her house. To escape from Jason, she was ready to be late for the lecture. After all, he did not miss a skirt. The girl did not want to mess with him. Barbara, the granddaughter of Professor William Johnson, did not want to embarrass her grandfather, who did not give her any privileges, although he taught her. How did he know my address? She was outraged by his behavior, but Jason continued to argue that he cared about her and had the most sincere and warm feelings for her. "Listen to me, Jason. I know you haven't missed a skirt in our department, or maybe you just collected them, but that's none of my business." Her eyes were filled with fear and rage by saying these words. Poor Barbara, if only she knew what she was going through. At this time, the professor continued to lecture in a quiet, monotonous tone. His attention was drawn to the fact that half of the lecture was absent. There was no Barbara. A knock on the door interrupted the teacher. "Sorry, I'm late." The old man's stern voice. "Why?" The girl was scared because it had never happened to her before. She always followed strict instructions, and her grandfather sat in front of her. "I overslept," said Barbara timidly. "Next time, set the alarm, and you get 2 additional questions on the paper as a punishment." The class laughed. The quiet one came. The boys immediately began to make silly jokes. They didn't stop even though she was the most beautiful girl in the class. She had the only friend in the department, Emma, who always came to her rescue. Everyone else did not like her because she was the granddaughter of the most famous professor. Her father and mother died years ago. She was a total orphan. Her upbringing was her grandfather. She barely had enough money to exist, so she dressed constantly in dark shades. The blue-eyed girl with blonde hair could not stand up for herself and continuously avoided noisy company. When she got to the task, she heard a voice. "You're not even going to say hello?" Looking back, she saw Jason sitting behind her back. Without answering anything, she went on with her assignments. The standings were difficult because her future depended on them. Emma and Barbara decided to fortify themselves at lunchtime as usual. The whole class was sitting in the dining room. A long-legged blonde approached their table and asked a strange question. "Are we still on for today? You'll be home by 8 o'clock. So Barbara decided to make some money. The girl used her knowledge differently. She helped underperforming students for an extra fee. They needed homework, and she lacked money. It was all fair. Jason decided to take advantage of this, and, conspiring with a friend of Barbara's, was awaiting for her in the apartment. The tall blonde went off to the pharmacy, leaving Barbara alone with him, and Jason locked the door from inside. It ended very badly for the girl, because Jason never tolerated rejection. He attacked her and took her by force. After the incident, the girl's world collapsed into a rattle. She was afraid there would be rumors at the university. The case will be loud and will not be punished anyways. She promised herself she wouldn't say anything to anyone. Barbara did not report him to the police, as the father of the rapist was a mighty man. There was no point in fighting him. With ragged mascara on her face and pain in her heart, she strode through the dark streets, avoiding people and car headlights. In addition, that evening, Grandpa was taken to hospital with another heart attack. The doctor said he'd been rescued at the ICU, but any stress could kill him. A green-eyed Mary in a white robe suspected that something terrible had happened. She offered help, but crying, Barbara refused. At home, she tried to forget all the horror that had befallen her. The rivers of tears ran down her cheeks, but even they could not wash away the shame. For a month, the girl did not leave the house. She constantly put on a hood on the street and was hidden from the eyes. Her grandfather was discharged home. At the next tea party, the older man's attention was drawn to the fact that his vast appetite ate chocolate cake. Barbara, when did you have time to love chocolate cakes? I don't know, she answered. Because in our family, only your mother loved it when she was pregnant with you. Well, I'm my mother's daughter, Barbara grinned, but her thoughts said otherwise. She drove them away all night. The following day, she couldn't stay at home. Grandpa was discharged from the hospital. Now he was at home, so he would immediately suspect an accident and molest with questions. After a whole month of missed lectures, Barbara decided to study. She was so hoping for the support of her friend Emma. She wanted to tell her how it was going, but something was in the way of stopping. She thought it was not the time yet. She walked into the classroom and saw Jason in the company of that girl's. Her eyes filled with tears of shame. She hated him, blamed herself. It was my fault, she kept telling herself, with her face gleeful and a finger pointed at her. Jason continued to tear her heart to pieces. Despite this, she continued to walk and keep her head up high as possible. Unable to withstand the pain, she fell unconscious right before him. A month later, it turned out that Barbara was pregnant. She tried to have an abortion, but the doctors did not advise her to do so because of her rhesus factor. In the future, there might be a possibility of not having children. Barbara, desperate, did not know what to do. Professor William heard about the incident from a close friend of Emma's and immediately convinced her granddaughter not to do anything stupid. He didn't care about the details, and he was glad Barbara was having a baby. When the girl's mother died in childbirth, it was because of the consequences of a failed abortion that her father forced upon her at a young age. After Eva's birth, her grandparents and Emma helped Barbara, who took care of her daughter unwillingly. She couldn't stop thinking about the circumstances under which her daughter had been conceived. She felt she was failing as a mother. One day, Jason found out that Barbara had given birth, began to intimidate them. He didn't want people to know he was the child's father. William had become witness to the scene, and his heart had broken. He had passed away. Barbara was left all alone with her child. She struggled through grief and realized she could not cope with a daughter who cried endlessly. Then, she left the stroller with Eva near the children's clinic. Along with the child, she put a note there, asking her to take care of the baby, and indicated her name. It was 7 long years after the tragedy. Barbara worked as a secretary at the bureau and was married to Simon. The man was hurrying with a wedding, but Barbara constantly stalled the process. The man felt that a concrete wall had grown between them. The bride was closing more and more against him every day. The concrete wall was her past, which the young man knew nothing. Simon didn't think she was sneaking around to watch her daughter grow up. She kept an eye on her life and gave her birthday gifts through her best friend. Emma worked at a charity foundation, so it was easy for her to see Barbara's daughter. Eva's fate was miraculous. She was adopted by the head of the children's fund, John and Mary Snow. Barbara understood the complexity of the situation. She couldn't just take her daughter away from her a few years ago. To do this, she had to take the baby by force. In order to not cause stress to the child, she had to find a way out. The woman decided to go rogue and play child psychologist and many nanny roles simultaneously. So she came into the family and started living with her little girl under the same roof, presenting herself as a child specialist. It seemed all the troubles were over, but Jason came out of nowhere. The guy came to John's house. He said he was the daughter's birth father and asked for a substantial amount of money to get rid of their biological mother. Mary Snow realized this was the only chance to get rid of Eva's biological mother once and for all. Jason conspired with Mary Snow to get rid of Barbara for a decent sum. One day in an argument, John Snow decided to kick his wife out of the house. As a result of the quarrel, Eva learned that she was their adopted daughter. In tears, she ran to her room. A desperate father threw everything into letting the young lady know he loved her madly. Mary could not understand why her husband had allowed Barbara into the house and treated her so well because she was a servant. There was no end to her jealousy. She feared Barbara would take away her husband. One night, a message arrived on Barbara's phone with an address. She drove there without slowing down. The door was left open, and when she came in, she saw Jason lying in a pool of blood, the knife handle sticking out of his chest. Frightened, she called the police. As the only witness, she was detained until the circumstances were clarified. The interrogation revealed that the prints on the knife were left behind when Jason tried to pull out the knife. Barbara wouldn't let him do it because he could have bled out and died before the doctors arrived. Even though he was cruel to her, she fought for his life to death. A small silver earring was shown to Barbara in the hopes that she was the owner of this taming. The girl couldn't remember when she saw the object. Sometime later, she called John, claiming that this jewel she saw on his wife Mary, and asked for his help. John remembered that this evening his wife was away somewhere. When she came home, she was confused and pale as snow. She went straight to the bathroom, where she spent quite a while. By juxtaposing all these facts, John began to rummage through her things in the hopes of finding a second earring. But the woman took care of it and got rid of the evidence. Out of desperation, John rushed to review his wife's photos on social media and found evidence implicating his wife. It was a deer horn earring. John persuaded his wife to confess to him during a quarrel to extract a confession of murder and clear the name of an innocent girl. At that time, the audio recording was turned on. It turned out that Mary was once again jealous of her husband, and she had planned things with Jason. He agreed. After all, the proposed amount clouded his mind, but the greedy lad couldn't resist the charming Mary during their secret meeting and plotted the same illegal acts, trying to rape her the same way. The woman broke free and grabbed the first thing she could. It was a knife. Then she sent a message to Barbara's phone, so she decided to get rid of her adopted daughter's mother and her rival. Poor Barbara, unaware of the plot between the two, rushed to the crime scene. The next day, John handed the recording to the investigator. Mary was locked up in prison. Barbara and John returned to Eva. Now their daughter's well-being was in their hands. No one stood in their way. "Hello, little girl. I know that it will not be so easy for you to forgive me." With these words, she turned to her 8-year-old daughter. Her tears seemed to choke her. She got out an album with pictures of all 7 years. With her shaking hands, she opened it. Those pictures captured her most vivid moments from the childhood of the little princess. Eva burst into tears and hung on to her mother's neck. Barbara, Eva, and John became a real family.